Moin Moin and welcome to Ralfs Foto-Bude. Yeah, it took a while to get the new Fuji here into the Foto-Bude, but now here is the new one, the X100T. The former model was the X100S, and so if you look careful, there are not so many differences between these cameras when you look at the outside. It's still the retro look, it's still the silver, and the buttons here on top with the dial for the shutter speed and the exposure correction. You have the shutter release and the function button here, flash shoe here. So the camera looks real similar to the X100S. But there are certain points in the camera which are important and which are really nice, which are new in the T model. First, coming to the points where there's no difference between the X100S and the X100T. First of all, that's the sensor. In both cameras we have a 16 megapixel APS-C sensor, the Fuji sensor, and you know this gives you a real good picture quality. Coming to a small difference, or not a small difference, but a difference, talking about the sensor in the S, the ISO value setting, the highest ISO value setting you can choose is 12,800, and when we go to the settings here at the X100T, press the Q button and then we go here to the ISO setting, turn the dial, and you will see the highest ISO setting we can get is 51,200. So the ISO setting goes up 2 steps from 12,800, 25,600 up to 51,200. So that's one of the differences between the old and the new model. Talking about the lens is exactly the same we had in the other cameras, in the old X100 cameras. It has 23 millimeter on the APS-C sensor. That gives you 35 millimeter compared to a full frame camera, and an aperture of 2.0. So that's exactly the same lens we have in the former models. I told you the layout of the camera is quite similar. We have the big screen here on the back side of the camera. We have the 4 buttons. Now they are round. They are a little bit other order than on the X100S. Also the order here of the buttons is a little bit different. The Q button moved from the downside here to this place, so it's a little bit better for the thumb to reach and a little bit easier to press the Q button. We have a dial here. At the old camera we have like a switch here. Now we have the dial here to change the different settings. We have the drive button here instead on the side. So there are minor differences between both cameras, but that's not the big difference between the S and the T model. Coming to one point, when we go to the when we go inside the menu, I can show you this point, and that's a difference between the S and the 100. So that's the not the last point, but almost the last point. That's the point shutter type. And when you go to the point shutter type, you will see that we have the mechanical shutter and that we have the electronical shutter. And this gives you an idea what to set when you use the electronic shutter. You can go from ISO 200 up to ISO 6400, and the fastest shutter speed in the electronic shutter is 1/23 thousandths of a second. So that's the fastest shutter speed. When you go to the mechanical shutter, we have an ISO speed which goes from ISO 100, so that's the low step, up to 51,200. And we have the different speed settings here on top of the camera, and you see we can start from B, so that's the long exposure, up to the 1/4000th of a second, that's the fastest speed. There was a little bit confusion about the electronic shutter and the firmware update, because you may know that the X-T1, the bigger camera, the professional camera of the Fuji line, comes with the new graphite style, and with the new graphite style there was the electronic shutter built in and some more features. But you also can use a firmware update, and with this firmware update also the old X-T1 cameras get the electronic shutter. And there were some rumors which said, okay, when they do the electronic shutter in the X-T1, they also can put the electronic shutter also in the X100S, and there were some rumors that the new firmware will give you the electronic shutter also on the X100S. But as far as I know, and as far as I found in the internet, the informations in the internet, I looked very careful and checked a lot of sites, also the Fuji site. There's no firmware update where we can get the electronic shutter in the old one, in the X100S. So the electronic shutter is a feature only of the X100 as far as I know and as far as I found out. And there's another point I will show you later, that's the new film simulation classic chrome. This is also only in the X100T. But talking about the electronic shutter, I don't know if you know everything about the electronic shutter and the difference between the mechanical shutter. When you think that the electronic shutter gives you the shortest time of one of 32,000th of a second, and you can use this one to freeze fast moving things, that's absolutely wrong. You can use the short shutter time, but not for freezing fast moving things. The reason is, when we work with the mechanical shutter, the shutter opens, the light comes in, the shutter closes, and the electronic reads the lines of the sensor, and that's it. But you hold the point, or you take the scene. When the shutter opens, you take the scene, shutter closes. So this takes as long time as you put here on the shutter speed. So if you use a 60th of a second, you take the image at the time of the 60th of a second. You can imagine, or you can, if you want to have a picture how this works. There's a place with these small sensors on the sensor of the camera. There are small pixels, and you can imagine these small pixels are like glass, and in this glass comes water. So imagine it rains, or the sunlight is like rain. When the lens opens, when the shutter opens, it rains, and the rain goes in all the glasses, and then the shutter closes, and then you can take your time to look how many water equivalent, how many light is in these glasses, or how many light catch the single pixel, and you read the single pixel and look, okay, there's a lot of light in, there's less light, more, less, and so on. And this takes as long as the electronic needs to read the shutter. But doesn't matter, because you have the shutter which opens and closes in a certain speed. When we go to the electronic shutter, the shutter is always open, so the light goes all the time to the sensor. It's like raining all the time in these glasses, or the light goes all the time to the pixel. And when we press the shutter release, what happens then? When we press the shutter release, the electronic reads the first line of the sensor and looks how many light get each pixel in the certain time, shortest time, 1/30,000 of a second. When the electronic reads the first line, goes to the next line, second line, third line, and so on and so on. And this reading of the sensor takes a lot of time. Not a lot of time, but it's much longer than the 1 over 32nd thousandth which you have set at the shutter. It takes, I don't know, but maybe a 250th of a second or something like this, but it takes the time. Only the single sensor has the exposure time, the short exposure time, but the whole sensor has a much longer time to read out. And so the problem is, if you have a fast moving object, it moves from the right to the left side. It is here when you read the first line, and it may be here when you read the last line of the sensor. So what happens in the picture? In the picture, this fast moving object is not clear, but it's like diagonal, and it looks a little bit weird. It looks not perfect. When you take a picture of a running dog with the electronic shutter and the dog is running real fast over the grass, and you take the picture, you will see that the dog gets a little bit longer than natural, and that's exactly what it looks like when you use the electronic shutter. And so for that reason, you can't use the electronic shutter for real fast moving objects when you use a short shutter time. And the next problem is you can't use the electronic shutter for taking flash pictures. The reason is very simple. The flash has a very short light time. So the light time of a flash is, I don't know, it's also like a 30,000th of a second, or it's very short time. And so the problem is you will have a certain part of the sensor which is lightened, but the rest of the sensor is dark. So you get a picture, if you use the electronic shutter with a flashlight, you get a picture where only part of the picture is lightened and the rest is dark. So when you use the electronic shutter, the flash is off. You can't use the flash. And the next and last point, you may think that it is a good idea to work with the electronic shutter in concerts or in museums. Yes, it is, because the camera is almost quiet. You won't hear anything when you press the shutter release. But the problem is also if you have artificial light and you have a special artificial light with a frequency, it can happen that the picture with the electronic shutter is also gets stripes, and these stripes are the frequency of the light, because the light doesn't light constantly, but with a frequency like 60 Hertz or 50 Hertz, and so you may have stripes in the picture. So it's a very good idea before you go to a concert or before you go to a museum and take pictures there, that you make some test pictures and look very careful on the result. Because if you see in the result stripes, that's not a good idea to work further with the electronic shutter. You have to change to the mechanical shutter. But honestly, the sound between the electronic and the mechanic shutter is so minimal that you also can use the mechanic shutter in concerts, because I think nobody will hear it except for very quiet passages in a concert, in a classic concert, but usually you won't hear the shutter also, the mechanical shutter also. So that's the difference. We have the mechanical shutter and we have the electronic shutter. One point I mentioned before, that's the film simulation, and if you go here into the menu and go to the first point, we can make a quick step to the menu. You will see we have here the autofocus setting. The menu, by the way, is like the new menu of the X30 and the X-T1, so it's a little bit different to the X100S, but you will find yourself very easy, so it's not the big difference. Here we have the ISO speed, as I said before, it goes up to 51,200, that's the highest ISO speed. Image size, we have the different sizes. We have the image quality, for sure, fine, normal and raw, and the combination of it. And we come to the dynamic range, you know this, and here we are at the film simulation. That's what I said before. We have the film simulation, that's the new one, Classic Chrome. The Classic Chrome is also in the Fujifilm X30 and in the X-T1, and comes also with the X100T, but not with a firmware update for the X100S, as far as I know. Okay, so we have the film simulation bracketing, nothing new. Also a feature we had in the old one, we have the ND filter, which we can turn on and off. We have the different color, sharpness, highlight tone, shadow tone, noise reduction settings, long exposure noise reduction, white balance, custom settings. You can edit the custom settings, function settings. You have the different keys where you can make individual settings for. You have the display custom settings. You can choose between the display and between the display and the electronic viewfinder. Very important, if you want the electronic level, you have to switch on the electronic level in the electronic viewfinder and in the screen. So that's very important. If you don't see the electronic viewfinder in the level in the electronic viewfinder, you have to switch it individually on. Conversion lens for wide angle or tele, manual focus assist. Here you have the different settings, digital split image or focus peaking in different colors, nothing new. That's also a feature, you know. Advanced filters, here we have the different advanced filters like toy camera, miniature, pop color, high key, low key, dynamic range, and so on and so on. Then we have the internal timer, interval shooting. You can make interval shootings here also with the camera. You can set the interval and the number of pictures you want to take. Self timer, AAF, lock mode, so you can set up the lock mode here for the button. Photometry, here you have the different settings, multi-spot and average. Also nothing new, that's the normal stuff. Red eye removal, flash mode, flash compensation, and as I said before, the shutter type. And now we come to a new point, the movie setup, because in the movie setup now we have the highest resolution in full HD with 60 frames per second, 60p, 50p, 30, 25, 24, and also on the small HD resolution 2080 by 720, also 60, 50, 30, 24 frames. So we have the whole set of video settings here now. We can set up the ISO setting from ISO 200 up to 6400. That's equal to the electronic shutter, because if you take a movie, you use the electronic shutter, so that's equal when you use the electronic shutter in photography, 200 to 6400. When you work in video, also 200 to 6400. If you work with the mechanical shutter, ISO 100, that's the low setting, up to 51200. So you have the new film settings, but I think the X100 is not a film camera. This is a street photography camera, portrait and stuff like this. But you can do movies now in the highest resolution. Then you have the wireless communication. That's new compared to the 100S. You can connect the camera to a smart device. You can see the live picture, and you can make a shutter release. You can transmit the picture to the smartphone. You can share it in social communities. So you have the connection between the camera and the smart devices like iPhone, iPad or Android devices. So these are the most important points in the firmware, but there's one point, and that's the electronic viewfinder. You know from the X100S that it is a combination of two viewfinders. It's an optical viewfinder and it's an electronical viewfinder. How this works? Very easy. You look through the viewfinder, you have the switch here in front of the camera, and as soon as you move the switch to the side, you change from the electronic viewfinder to the optical viewfinder. You may know the optical viewfinder from the X100S. With the X100T, there comes a new feature in the optical viewfinder. In the optical viewfinder, you will see a frame, and the frame moves depending on the distance you take your photo. So if you go to the manual focusing, here on the side we have single, continuous and manual focusing. If you go to the manual focusing and look with the optical viewfinder through the lens and turn the distance, you will see that the frame inside of the optical viewfinder moves from the top left position down to the right position, to the down right position, as closer you get your scene. So that's the parallax, and the camera looks for the distance and makes the parallax correction automatically with the moving frame to the point, so you see exactly which scene you take. You have exactly the spot which you take, so that's not an guessing. It's exactly the frame. The frame shows you exactly which scene you take, because it has the parallax correction inside. It's an overlay over the optical viewfinder. It's an electronic overlay, so you have the view of the optical viewfinder, but you have the frame, the information, everything from an electronic viewfinder. And that's a very, very nice feature, because so you see everything exactly the frame you take, and you don't have to guess which it is, and you don't have to switch to the electronic viewfinder. Even if the electronic viewfinder has a very high resolution with a 2.4 megapixel, but the optical viewfinder is nicer, it's a clearer picture, it's very crisp, and it's a real fantastic picture. And now you have the add-on, the parallax correction with this new viewfinder. So not only the frame is moving from the top left to the bottom right if you change the distance, but also the autofocus point is moving when you change the distance. So you know that we can move the autofocus point here, and we can change the size of the autofocus point, and this will happen when you make the setting for the autofocus point here, and you go to the lens, to the viewfinder, and look through the viewfinder, and the focus point is very close, then the focus point moves a little bit. So you always get the right focus point. Doesn't matter in which distance you have the scene you're taking. So this is the new feature of the X100T. That's the parallax correction, which is built in the viewfinder, electronic viewfinder on the one side, and optical viewfinder on the other side. Yeah, so these are the most important new features. In the summary, we have the same sensor, 16 megapixel. We have APS-C sensor. We have the same lens, 23mm f2.0. ISO setting goes up to 51,200 now. We have the new viewfinder combination of optical and electronic viewfinder. Optical viewfinder with a parallax correction frame. Then we have the classic chrome filter. We have the new movie settings, and the electronic and mechanical shutter. These are the main features of the X100T. Okay, so that's it for today with the new retro style camera from Fuji. Hoped you enjoyed my review of this camera. There are coming up some more cameras, and for sure we are also in the copter business. We are still in the copter business. and expecting some new copters in the near future. So it's not only cameras, we also get again copters here on my Foto-Bude channel. Thank you for watching, come back again, and as always I say bye and moin moin.